He asked her simple questions. She couldn't give simple answers. That's when everyone knew. The hearing room smelled like floor polish and ambition. It always did. The Russell Senate building had been soaking in both since 1909, and no amount of renovation could scrub out either one. Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana arrived 20 minutes early, which was unusual for a man who liked to make entrances. He wore a navy suit that his wife had picked out, wire-rimmed glasses that made him look like a small-town librarian, and shoes that needed polishing. He carried one folder. One. It was thin enough to bend in his hand, and he set it on the table the way a man might set down a church bulletin casually, as if it contained nothing of consequence. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on federal fraud in government-funded programs was supposed to be routine oversight, accountability, the kind of thing C-SPAN broadcast to empty living rooms while America ate dinner. But the witness list had leaked 2 days ago, and when reporters saw the name Representative Ilhan Omar, DMN, next to invited testimony, the hearing had become the hottest ticket in Washington. Omar arrived at exactly 10 a.m., flanked by 2 attorneys from a K Street firm and a phalanx of staffers carrying binders thick enough to stop bullets. She wore a deep purple hijab and a tailored blazer, her chin lifted at the angle she used for cameras. She had spent 3 days preparing for this. Her team had run mock hearings. They had anticipated every attack, every insinuation, every racist dog whistle a Republican senator might deploy. She was ready. The gallery was packed. Omar's supporters had arrived before dawn. Young progressives in Defend Ilhan t-shirts. Hijab-wearing women in solidarity. A contingent from KR with matching lanyards. The media section was standing room only. MSNBC had sent Joy Reid's producer. CNN had 2 camera crews. The stories were preloaded on their laptops, waiting for the moment Omar would dismantle whatever Republican theater was planned. Omar took her seat at the witness table and nodded coolly to Kennedy, who was already seated across from her. She expected hostility. What she got was worse. Kennedy smiled. Not a political smile. Not the camera-ready grin that politicians practice in bathroom mirrors. The warm, crinkle-eyed smile of a grandfather who was genuinely glad to see you. Representative Omar, he said in that honeyed Louisiana drawl, the one that made every sentence sound like it was being told on a front porch with sweet tea nearby. Thank you for accepting our invitation. I want you to know before we start, I appreciate you being here. Some folks in your position would have refused. Takes courage to show up. Omar's lead attorney shifted slightly. Compliments from John Kennedy were like a bayou calm on the surface, full of things with teeth underneath. And I want to say something else, Kennedy continued, adjusting his glasses. Your story is remarkable. I mean that. You came to this country from a refugee camp in Kenya. A young girl who'd lost her mother, fled a civil war, spent years in a camp, and you became a United States Congresswoman. He paused, and the pause felt genuine. That is the American dream. That's the story my daddy would have told at the dinner table and said, "See, that's why this country is special." A few of Omar's supporters in the gallery nodded approvingly. This wasn't the attack they'd expected. Maybe the old man was going soft. Omar allowed herself a small, cautious smile. Thank you, Senator. I appreciate those words. I mean every one of them, Kennedy said. Then he put on his reading glasses, opened the thin folder with the same casualness with which he'd set it down, and looked at the single page inside. Now, ma'am, I just have a few simple questions. Nothing complicated. I'm a simple man from a simple state, and I like simple answers. He looked up over the rim of his glasses, just trying to understand some numbers that don't quite add up. The camera caught the flicker in Omar's eyes, the micro-expression that lasted less than a second, but said everything. She recognized in that moment what anyone who'd watched Kennedy work a hearing room already knew. Simplicity from this particular senator was the most dangerous weapon in Washington. "Of course," Omar said, her voice steady. "I'm happy to answer any questions." Kennedy smiled again. "Well, then," he said, "let's start with something easy." Kennedy looked down at his single sheet of paper, then back up at Omar with an expression of friendly confusion, the expression of a man who'd found a raccoon in his garbage can and was genuinely puzzled about how it got there. "Ma'am, I've been looking at your financial disclosures, the ones you filed with the clerk of the House under penalty of perjury." He let that last phrase float gently across the room. "In 2023, you reported assets of about $250,000. Does that sound right?" "That's approximately correct," Omar said. "And student loan debt, some credit card debt, a working mom, you said, making ends meet in two expensive cities, Minneapolis and Washington. I understand that cost of living is tough everywhere." Omar nodded. She was on comfortable ground, relatable, human. "But then I looked at your 2024 disclosure," Kennedy continued, still wearing that puzzled expression. "And ma'am, I have to tell you, I thought there was a typo because, according to what you filed, your assets jumped to somewhere between $6 million and $30 million. He looked up. "In 1 year." The number hung in the air like cigar smoke. So, I put my glasses on and read it again. And it wasn't a typo. Kennedy scratched the back of his head, a gesture so folksy it could have come with a banjo soundtrack. "Now, ma'am, I was state treasurer of Louisiana for 21 years. I've seen a lot of financial statements, seen them go up, seen them go down, but I've never in my entire career seen anyone go from $250,000 to $30 million in 12 months. He paused, and when he spoke again, his drawl slowed to the pace of molasses. "Where I come from, we call that either a miracle or a whole lot of explaining. And since you don't appear to have found the Ark of the Covenant, I'm hoping for the explaining." Scattered laughter rolled through the gallery. Even a few of Omar's supporters smiled. Kennedy's humor was like that. It disarmed you before the blade came out. "My husband's business ventures experienced significant growth," Omar said, her rehearsed answer delivered smoothly. "He operates Rose Lake Capital, a venture capital firm, and E Street Group, a winery in California. Business valuations can fluctuate substantially." "They sure can," Kennedy agreed amiably. "So, let's talk about those businesses." He consulted his sheet of paper, just one glance, quick as a hummingbird. "Rose Lake Capital, your husband's venture capital firm. Now, there were some court proceedings in 2024 involving Mr. Minette's businesses. Discovery documents were filed, and according to those documents," he read slowly, "Rose Lake Capital had $42.44 in its bank account." He looked up. $42.44. The gallery stirred. And the winery E Street Group had 5 cents, a nickel. Kennedy held up his hand, thumb and forefinger almost touching. "I couldn't buy a piece of bubble gum with what was in those accounts." He set down the paper. "Now, you're telling this committee that a company with $42 in the bank is worth between $5 million and $25 million. Ma'am, that's like me saying my neighbor's basset hound is worth a Maserati because it might win the Kentucky Derby someday. The math just doesn't work." More laughter, louder this time, but underneath the laughter, something was shifting. The reporters had stopped smiling. They were writing. Omar's composure held, but her lead attorney was already leaning in to whisper. She waved him off. Business valuations are based on projected future earnings, intellectual property, and deal pipelines, Senator, not just bank balances. I'm sure the Treasurer of Louisiana understands that. Oh, I do, Kennedy said pleasantly. I also understand that when a company's bank account has a balance that wouldn't cover a Happy Meal and its projected value is $25 million, somebody's either a genius or a liar. He held up a hand quickly. Now, I'm not saying which. I'm just saying those are the two options. He shifted forward slightly. But here's what really puzzles me, ma'am. In February 2025, you told Business Insider, and I'm quoting here, "I am not a millionaire. I am a working mom with student loan debt." That was after you filed the disclosure showing up to $30 million in assets. He pulled his glasses down his nose and looked at her over the rims. So, which is it? Which? Are you a working mom with student loans? Or are you worth $30 million? Because you told the public one thing and you told the government under penalty of perjury something very different. Omar's jaw tightened. My husband's assets are reported on my disclosure as required by House rules. That doesn't mean they are my personal. Ma'am, Kennedy interrupted gently. When you file a financial disclosure that says $30 million and then you tell a reporter you're not a millionaire, one of those statements is false. I can't tell you which one, but I can count to 30 million, and I can count student loan debt. And those two numbers don't live in the same neighborhood. The progressive section of the gallery had gone quiet. Not hostile quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when people start listening instead of cheering. Kennedy leaned back in his chair, which creaked like it had opinions of its own. Now, that's just the numbers, and numbers are cold things. They don't have feelings. They don't have religion. They don't have politics. They just are. He closed the folder. He wouldn't open it again for the rest of the hearing. Let's talk about where some of those numbers might have come from. Shall we discuss the Meals Act? Kennedy took a sip of water from a paper cup. It was the kind of small human gesture that made people forget they were watching a Senate hearing and feel instead like they were sitting in a living room listening to a sharp old man tell a story that would end somewhere devastating.
In 2080, he
began. You sponsored the Meals Act. The idea was to make it easier to feed hungry children during COVID. Schools were closed. Kids who depended on school lunches were going without. A real problem. A serious problem. And your bill was supposed to help. He nodded almost to himself. I voted for similar programs. Nobody wants children to go hungry. That's not a Republican position or a Democrat position. That's a human being position. Omar straightened in her chair. This was territory she'd prepared for. The Meals Act expanded access to federal nutrition programs at a time when millions of children— I know what it did on paper, Kennedy said. Let me tell you what it did in practice. His voice lost exactly 1 degree of warmth. Just one. But, in the quiet room, everyone felt the temperature change. $250 million was stolen. $250 million. Not lost to bureaucratic waste. Not eaten up by overhead. Stolen by criminals who exploited the program your bill created. He let the numbers sit. Now, here's how it worked. For the folks watching at home who aren't familiar with this scandal, people in Minnesota set up daycare centers. On paper, these centers were feeding hundreds of children every day. The federal government, using the framework your bill expanded, sent money to pay for those meals. Kennedy's drawl deepened the way it always did when he was about to deliver the devastating part. But there was a problem. Those daycare centers weren't feeding anybody. Some of them didn't have any children at all. Reporters found buildings with locked doors and dark windows that were billing the government for thousands of meals a day. Shell companies, fake invoices, fake attendance sheets, fake everything. He looked at Omar. 78 people have been indicted, 57 convicted. And these weren't masterminds, ma'am. Some of them tried to bribe a juror with $120,000 in cash in a paper bag. That's not organized crime. That's brazen theft by people who believed nobody was watching. Kennedy's voice dropped. But you know who I keep thinking about? Not the criminals, the children. The room shifted. Something in Kennedy's tone had changed from prosecutor to preacher. There's a 7-year-old girl in Cedar Riverside. I don't know her name, but she exists, who was supposed to get lunch through this program. Her mama works 2 jobs. School was closed because of COVID. The government promised that girl a meal. Your bill was supposed to deliver that meal. He paused. But the money that was supposed to buy that little girl's lunch went into a shell company in Minneapolis. From there, it went into a wire transfer. And from there, it bought a Mercedes-Benz for a man who has never fed a hungry child in his life. 2 women in the gallery, Omar supporters who had arrived wearing Defend Ilhan shirts, looked down at their laps. That little girl went hungry, ma'am. Not because the government didn't care. Not because there wasn't enough money. She went hungry because the money was stolen through a program you sponsored. Omar found her voice, and it carried the edge of someone who had practiced this response. Senator, I was one of the first members of Congress to call for an investigation into this fraud. I sent a letter to the Secretary of Agriculture. When? Kennedy asked. Excuse me, when did you send that letter? Before or after the journalist exposed the fraud? Silence. Because I have the letter, ma'am. It's dated after the story broke. Not before, not during, after. When the cameras were already rolling and the indictments were already coming. He scratched his chin. Now, maybe that's a coincidence. Maybe you were writing that letter at the same time reporters were publishing their stories. But here's what bothers me. He counted on his fingers the way a man might count items at a grocery store. 1. The program your bill created was exploited for $250 million. 2. The majority of the convicted fraudsters are from your district in Minnesota. 3. Some of those fraudsters donated to your campaign, donations you returned after they were caught. Not before, after. He held up a 4th finger. And 4, in the same period this fraud was exploding, your family's net worth jumped from $250,000 to $30 million. He looked at her with an expression that had shed the last of its warmth. Now, I am not accusing you of anything, ma'am. I want to be very clear about that. I am asking questions. That's my job. And so far, you have not given me a single answer that makes the math work. Omar's lead attorney leaned forward. Senator, you are drawing connections that don't exist. Representative Omar had no knowledge of or involvement in... Counselor, I'm talking to the representative, Kennedy said, not unkindly. She's a grown woman. She can speak for herself. He turned back to Omar. Unless you'd rather have your lawyer answer for you. Omar's eyes flashed. I can answer for myself. Then answer this. $250 million stolen from a program you sponsored. Your net worth jumps $30 million in a year. You returned campaign donations from convicted fraudsters, but only after they were convicted. Don't those numbers bother you? I find it deeply offensive that you would imply, ma'am, the only thing I'm implying is that $250 million was stolen from hungry children. If that doesn't bother you, we have bigger problems than your financial disclosure. The room had gone church quiet. The kind of quiet where you can hear the photographer's shutter from 50 feet away. Kennedy reached for his water cup again, but money is money. Let's talk about something more personal. He took a sip. Let's talk about Mr. Tim Mint. Kennedy sat down his paper cup and folded his hands on the table. The gesture made him look like a Sunday school teacher about to discuss a particularly uncomfortable parable. Ma'am, your campaign, Omar for Congress, paid approximately $2.78 million to a company called E Street Group. Is that correct? My campaign used E Street Group for legitimate consulting services, Omar said carefully. Digital advertising, fundraising, mail production, $2.78 million worth, Kennedy repeated. Now, E Street Group is owned by Mr. Tim Minette, who is currently your husband, but at the time those payments began, he was married to someone else, a woman named Beth Minette. Omar's attorneys were already moving pens, scratching heads, leaning together. And during the time your campaign was paying his company millions of dollars, you were having a romantic relationship with Mr. Minette. Kennedy didn't phrase it as a question. He didn't need to. His wife at the time found out, and she filed for divorce. He pulled a single sheet from inside his suit jacket, not from the folder, from his jacket, as if he'd been carrying it close to his heart. Now, I normally wouldn't read someone's divorce filing in a public hearing. That's private pain, and I respect private pain. But Mrs. Beth Minette's words were given under oath in a court of law, and they directly involved the use of campaign funds. So, I hope you'll forgive me. He read slowly, not for dramatic effect, slowly the way you read something that deserves to be heard by every person in the room. Mrs. Minette stated under oath in her divorce deposition, "My husband told me in April 2019 that he was having an affair with Congresswoman Omar. He said he had been traveling with her on campaign trips that I now believe were personal in nature. When I asked how they could afford all this travel, he said, 'Don't worry about it. Ilhan's campaign is covering everything.'" Kennedy set the paper down. Ilhan's campaign is covering everything. The gallery was motionless. Now, the campaign is not a magic fund, ma'am. Campaign money comes from donors, real people, working people in Minneapolis who gave $20 or $50 because they believed in you, a grandmother on a fixed income, a young man saving for college, a single dad who skipped his coffee for a week so he could contribute. His drawl deepened. Those people didn't donate to fund anyone's love life. They donated because they thought their money was going to democracy. Instead, it went to hotel suites and romantic dinners, and travel for two to places where no campaign events were scheduled. Omar's face had hardened into the expression she wore on cable news, defiant, controlled. Those were legitimate campaign expenditures that were properly reported. Were they? Kennedy leaned forward. Because the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board found that you used $3,160 in campaign funds for personal travel. They also found you used campaign funds to pay for personal tax preparation, specifically to correct those joint tax returns you filed with a man you weren't married to. We'll get to that in a moment. He held up a finger. But my personal favorite, and I use that word loosely, is this. You used campaign funds to pay your divorce attorney. You were divorcing Mr. Elmy so you could marry Mr. Minette, whose company you were paying $2.78 million in campaign funds. Kennedy sat back and looked at the ceiling as if performing complex arithmetic in his head. So, let me see if I've got this right. Campaign donors gave you money. You used that money to pay a man you were sleeping with. Then you used more of that money to divorce your husband. Then you married the man you were paying, and then you kept paying him. He looked at Omar. Ma'am, Where I come from, that's not a political campaign. That's a business plan. The sound that came from the gallery was not laughter. It was the sharp intake of breath from people who had just heard something they couldn't unhear. One of Omar's staffers in the back row put her face in her hands. Kennedy wasn't done. But here's what really gets me. After all of this became public, the affair, the payments, the divorce, you cut ties with E Street Group. You said it was to avoid the appearance of impropriety, but by then, the company had already received $2.78 million. He rubbed his temples. That's like robbing a bank, returning the bag and saying, "You want to avoid the appearance of bank robbery? The money's already gone." Omar turned to her attorneys, a whispered conference. Urgent. The lead attorney straightened his tie, a nervous habit, and nodded. "Senator," Omar said, her voice tight, "I have addressed these campaign finance matters extensively. I have cooperated with every inquiry, and I find it deeply troubling that you are using a woman's divorce, a painful personal matter, as political theater." Kennedy nodded slowly. "Ma'am, I agree with you. Divorce is painful, which is why I feel for Mrs. Beth Meint. She didn't ask for any of this. She didn't run for Congress. She didn't sponsor any bills. She was a wife who found out her husband was having an affair with a congresswoman and that the congresswoman's campaign was footing the bill." He looked directly at Omar. "You want to talk about painful personal matters? Mrs. Minette had her marriage destroyed and had to learn that it was funded by campaign donors. Where's your sympathy for her?" Omar opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. Kennedy let the silence breathe. Then, quietly, "Now I promised I'd ask simple questions, so here's the simplest one yet." He removed his glasses, set them carefully on the table. When he spoke again, his drawl was still there, but something underneath it had turned to steel. "Can you tell this committee under oath who Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi is to you?" The hearing room had changed, not physically, the same marble columns, the same brass fixtures, the same portraits of dead senators watching from the walls. But the air had changed. The energy that Omar's supporters had brought into the room, the defiance, the solidarity, the righteous certainty had evaporated like dew on hot pavement. Kennedy sat perfectly still without his glasses. His face looked different, sharper. The folksy grandfather had packed up and gone home, and what remained was a man who had graduated magna cum laude from Oxford, who had spent 2 decades counting every dollar in Louisiana's treasury, and who had not asked a single question today that he didn't already know the answer to. "Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi," Kennedy Laplai. "You legally married him in 2009, Hennepin County, Minnesota. Marriage certificate on file. Is he your brother?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Omar's lead attorney was on his feet before she could respond. "Senator, this line of questioning is based on thoroughly debunked conspiracy theories rooted in Islamophobia and xenophobia. My client..." "Counselor," Kennedy said, "I asked a yes or no question. I didn't ask for a press release." He turned back to Omar. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one more time, and I'd appreciate a direct answer. Is Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi your biological brother? Yes or no?" Omar straightened in her chair. Her voice carried the practiced steel of a woman who had answered this question 100 times on cable news. "No, he is not my brother. That allegation is a baseless, racist conspiracy theory that has been debunked." "Thank you," Kennedy said. "He's not your brother. You've said so under oath. That's on the record. Now, since he's not your brother, and since this is a conspiracy theory that you say has caused you great personal pain for nearly a decade, why not end it today?" Omar's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean? A DNA test? Kennedy said simply. Quick, painless. One swab results in a week. If he's not your brother, the test proves it. Conspiracy theory dead, buried. Nobody can ever bring it up again. You win forever. The room held its breath. I will not submit to a degrading... The Daily Mail asked you in 2019, Kennedy continued, as if she hadn't spoken. You refused. The Minneapolis Star-Tribune asked you, refused. Fox News, refused. Congressional investigators, refused. Tom Homan announced his office is looking into it. And now I'm asking you under oath in front of the American people. He spread his hands on the table. If this man is not your brother, one cotton swab makes every question I'm asking right now disappear. It vindicates you completely, permanently. So I ask again with genuine respect, why won't you do it? Omar's attorneys were in full conference mode. Whispers flew back and forth like sparrows in a barn. Omar sat rigid, her jaw working, her eyes locked on Kennedy with an intensity that could have melted the Senate seal off the wall behind him. She said nothing. Kennedy let the silence last 5 seconds. 10. 15. The silence was louder than anything either of them had said all morning. I'll take that as a continued refusal, Kennedy said quietly. And the American people can decide for themselves what that refusal means. He shifted gears, not abruptly. Kennedy never did anything abruptly, but with the smooth, unhurried certainty of a man steering a John boat through familiar bayou channels. Let's talk about what we do know. Facts, records, no conspiracy theories needed. He looked at his single sheet of paper, which by now felt less like a document and more like a loaded weapon. While you were legally married to Mr. Elmi, you filed joint federal tax returns with Mr. Ahmed Hirsi in 2014 and 2015. Is that correct? Omar's lead attorney. My client is not going to address... Ma'am, Kennedy looked past the attorney directly at Omar. Did you file joint tax returns with Mr. Hirsi while legally married to Mr. Elmi? A long pause. On the advice of counsel, the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board already answered this question for you, Kennedy said. In their investigation, they confirmed that you filed joint returns with Hirsi while legally married to Elmi. That's not a conspiracy theory, ma'am. That's your signature on a federal tax return. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. Now, I'm not a tax lawyer. I'm just a country senator from Louisiana. But even I know that filing a joint tax return with someone who is not your legal spouse is a federal offense. 26 U.S. Code Section 7206, willfully filing a fraudulent return, up to 3 years in federal prison and a $250,000 fine. He let the statute citation hang in the air. And there's something else that puzzles me. In 2017, when you filed for divorce from Mr. Elmi, you submitted an application for service by alternate means. In that document, you stated under oath that you'd had no contact with Mr. Elmi since June 2011. Kennedy looked up. But in 2015, you posted photographs on your Instagram account under your nickname, Hawa, of a trip to London. In those photographs, you are standing next to Mr. Elmi. He let the contradiction speak for itself. So, you told a Minnesota court you hadn't seen this man since 2011, but in 2015 you were posting pictures with him in London. Ma'am, those two things cannot both be true. One of them is perjury. Omar's second attorney, the one who hadn't spoken all morning, pulled out a legal pad and began writing what was either a very important note or a very urgent resignation letter. Kennedy leaned back. The chair creaked that same sympathetic creak, as if even the furniture knew what was coming. Ma'am, I've been asking questions in Senate hearing rooms for 8 years now. Before that, I spent 21 years in Louisiana state government. I've questioned hundreds of witnesses, maybe thousands, good people, bad people, confused people, scared people. His voice softened to something almost tender. And I've learned one thing that has never failed me. Innocent people answer questions. They answer quickly, clearly, and completely. Because the truth is easy. It doesn't require preparation. It doesn't require lawyers. It doesn't require refusing DNA tests or invoking the Fifth Amendment or posting Instagram photos that contradict court filings. He looked at Omar. Innocent people have nothing to hide. Guilty people have nothing to say. The gallery was silent. Not the charged silence of anticipation, but the hollow silence of people watching something collapse. But we have one more subject to cover, Kennedy said. And this one isn't about money. It isn't about marriages. It isn't about tax returns. Giọng ông thay đổi. Giống miền Nam không mất đi, nó không thể mất đi cũng giống như sông Mississippi không thể ngừng chảy về phía Nam. Nhưng cái gì đó bên dưới, nó đã dịch chuyển, như nền đá chuyển động. This one's about 2,997 Americans who went to work one morning and never came home. Kennedy removed his glasses from the table and placed them in his jacket pocket. He wouldn't need them for this. He didn't need a sheet of paper. He didn't need notes. What he was about to say had been living inside him for years. And it didn't require a script. The room felt it. Every person in that gallery, progressive, conservative, media, staff, felt the atmospheric pressure drop, the way animals feel a storm before it arrives. Kennedy had spent 5 chapters being funny. He had made the gallery laugh, made even Omar's supporters smile. The humor had been his instrument, his tool, his weapon of choice. He put it down now. What replaced it was something the hearing room had not yet seen from the senior senator from Louisiana. Uncut moral conviction. In 2019, Kennedy Batdo, và Jong Ong da Kak Han. Thap Hun, Chum Hun, Tuk Bo Mai Su Hua Mi. You spoke at a fundraiser for the Council on American Islamic Relations, and you said the following words. He didn't read them. He recited them from memory the way a man might recite a wound. CARE was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something. He stopped. He looked at the table for a moment, then back up. Some people did something. The words fell like stones into a well, and the well had no bottom. On September 11, 2001, 19 terrorists hijacked 4 commercial airplanes. They flew 2 of them into the World Trade Center in New York City. They flew 1 into the Pentagon. The passengers of the 4th, ordinary Americans, ma'am, not politicians, not celebrities, ordinary people, fought back, and that plane crashed into a field in Pennsylvania. Kennedy's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. 2,977 people were murdered that day. Murdered, ma'am. Not casualties of something. Murdered. Firefighters ran into buildings that were burning and collapsing, knowing they would not come out. They ran in anyway. 303 of them died. Paramedics, police officers, port authority workers, people whose job it was to save strangers, and they did it. And they died doing it. He paused. The gallery was absolutely motionless. A woman in the 3rd row was crying silently. People jumped from the 80th floor rather than burn alive. Jumped, ma'am, from a 1/4 mile in the sky because that was better than the alternative. Wives called their husbands from inside those buildings to say goodbye. Husbands called their wives. A flight attendant named Betty called American Airlines from seat 3R of Flight 11 and calmly reported the hijacking while the plane was being flown into the North Tower. She was 45 years old. Kennedy looked at Omar. And you called it something done by some people. Omar opened her mouth to respond, but Kennedy raised one hand, not sharply, not angrily, just a slow, deliberate lift of the palm that said, "Not yet. I have defended publicly on this floor on camera your right to criticize Israel. Policy disagreements are American. Disagreeing with a foreign government's actions is American. I have never and will never say that criticizing Israel makes someone an anti-Semite." His voice hardened. "But that is not what you do, ma'am. In 2019, you said support for Israel was all about the Benjamin's baby. You reduced the Jewish people's deepest geopolitical cause to a bribe. You were forced to apologize by your own party." He counted. "In 2021, you compared the United States and Israel to Hamas and the Taliban. Your own Democratic colleagues, not Republicans, Democrats, issued a statement condemning you," another finger. "In 2023, your own party voted to remove you from the House Foreign Affairs Committee, not because of policy differences, but because of a pattern of rhetoric that your own colleagues found indefensible," another finger. "In 2024, you visited Columbia University and called Jewish students pro-genocide. Students, ma'am, young people exercising their right to disagree with you, and you labeled them pro-genocide." He set his hand down. "That's not criticism of Israel. That's a pattern, and patterns have names." Kennedy's drawl, which had faded during this passage like color draining from a photograph, returned now, but it returned changed, weighted, carrying something heavy. "I represent Louisiana. You know what my people do? They fish, they farm, they build ships, they cook the best food in America, and they don't charge you $40 for it. They go to church on Sunday, and they coach Little League on Saturday. They don't have venture capital firms. They don't have winery valuations that jump from a nickel to $5 million. His voice cracked. Not much, barely a fracture in the foundation, but in the absolute silence of the hearing room, everyone heard it. But they pay taxes, and their taxes fund federal nutrition programs, programs that, under your bill, were looted for $250 million. Their taxes pay your congressional salary, $174,000 a year, while you minimize the worst attack on American soil since Pearl Harbor. Their taxes support the system that gave you, a refugee from Somalia, the opportunity to become a United States Congresswoman. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't even raising his voice. But every word carried the weight of a man who had spent 40 years listening to people from Shreveport and Baton Rouge and Lake Charles and Natchitoches, who had heard their frustrations and their hopes and their anger, and who was speaking for them now in the only room that mattered. My people deserve better than this. Your people, the people of Minnesota's 5th District, deserve better than this. All Americans deserve better than this. The woman in the 3rd row was still crying. She wasn't the only one anymore. Kennedy looked at Omar for a long time. She stared back. For the first time all day, there was no defiance in her eyes, no anger, no rehearsed response, just the hollow expression of a woman who had come to this hearing expecting to fight a political battle, and had instead been confronted with something she had no weapon against. The truth delivered without malice, without theater, without anything but the plain grief of a man who loved his country and was watching it be taken for granted. I have one final question, ma'am, Kennedy said. He stood up. He had been seated for the entire hearing through 5 chapters of questions, through humor and evidence, and the slow accumulation of damage, and his standing now carried the force of punctuation, a period at the end of a very long sentence. "Representative Omar," he said, and his use of her title was deliberate, not hostile, not mocking, but precise. A reminder that titles carry obligations. You came to the United States as a refugee. You were a child. Your mother had passed away. Your family fled a civil war. You spent years in a camp in Kenya, waiting for a country to take you in. He paused. And America took you in. The room was still. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. This country gave you asylum, gave you safety, gave you an education, gave you citizenship, gave you the right to vote, the right to speak freely, the right to practice your faith. And then, this is the part that amazes me, this country gave you the right to run for office, to represent the very people who welcomed you. Kennedy's voice carried something rare for a politician. Wonder, genuine wonder at the thing he was describing. You became a state legislator, then a United States Congresswoman. A refugee from a camp in Kenya became a member of the United States House of Representatives. Ma'am, there is no other country on earth where that story is possible. Not one. He looked at her. So my final question is this, and it's not a trick question. It's not a legal question. It's the question that every taxpayer in this country has the right to ask. He spoke slowly, each word carrying its full weight. What have you done with that gift? The question floated across the hearing room like a hymn in an empty church. You sponsored a bill that was exploited to steal $250 million from hungry children. Your net worth jumped from nothing to $30 million in a year. And you can't explain how you used campaign money donated by working people to fund your personal life, your divorce, your boyfriend's company. You filed false tax returns. You refused to answer basic questions about your marriage history. You called the murder of 2,927 Americans something. You have spread hatred against Jewish people so consistently that your own party removed you from a committee. He let the list settle. America gave you everything, ma'am. Everything. The question isn't what America owes you. The question is what you owe America. And based on what I've seen today, the answer is an apology, an explanation, and about $250 million. Omar's last defense was the only one she had left. She leaned into the microphone and her voice shook, not with weakness, but with the particular fury of a person who had run out of arguments and was reaching for the last weapon in the arsenal. Senator Kennedy, what you have done today is an act of racism. You have targeted me because I am a black Muslim immigrant woman. Every question you have asked has been designed not to seek truth, but to dehumanize me and delegitimize my presence in Congress. This is exactly the kind of— Ma'am, Kennedy said, and his voice was so quiet the microphone barely caught it. I haven't mentioned your race. I haven't mentioned your religion. I haven't mentioned your gender. Not once. I have talked about money, tax returns, campaign funds, a bill that led to $250 million in fraud, and your own words about 9/11. He stepped away from the table. You keep telling America that anyone who questions you is a racist, but you can't answer the questions. And at some point, today specifically, the American people are going to notice that every time you're asked a question you don't like, you call the questioner a bigot. That's not a defense, ma'am. That's a confession that you don't have one. The silence that followed was the kind that ends careers. At that moment, the committee chairman cleared his throat and read a statement into the record. The Department of Justice and the House Ethics Committee had opened formal inquiries into Representative Omar's financial disclosures, campaign expenditures, and tax filings. The Treasury Department's investigation into potential links between Minnesota fraud funds and foreign entities would be expanded. A separate review of the Meals Act oversight failures was being referred to the Inspector General. Omar's attorneys gathered their binders. Her staffers were already filing out, heads down, phones pressed to ear. One by one, the Defend Ilhan signs disappeared from the gallery. A Democratic colleague on the committee leaned into his microphone. "I want to note for the record that oversight and accountability are bipartisan values. Every American, regardless of party, deserves honest representation." He didn't look at Omar when he said it. He didn't need to. Kennedy gathered his folder, still thin, still containing only a sheet of paper, and slipped it into his jacket. He hadn't opened it since Chapter 2. He hadn't needed to. Every devastating revelation had come from public records, published reports, and Omar's own words. He nodded to the chairman, buttoned his jacket, and walked toward the exit. But he stopped just for a moment, just long enough to turn back to Omar, who sat alone at the witness table. "Ma'am, where I come from in Louisiana, we have a saying, 'Don't pee on my leg and tell me it's raining.'" He adjusted his glasses. "For 7 years, you've been telling America it's raining. Today, the sun came out." He turned and walked through the door. The cameras followed him as cameras do. They follow the person who still has power, not the one who just lost it. Behind him, Ilhan Omar sat at the witness table. The microphone in front of her was still on, the red light still glowing, but she had nothing left to say into it. The hearing ended at 3:22 p.m. Eastern Time. By 3:30, the clip of Kennedy's "Don't pee on my leg" line had been viewed 6 million times. By the time most Americans sat down for dinner, the number had lost all meaning. It was everywhere. Fox News led with "Kennedy dismantles Omar." CNN ran with "Contentious Senate hearing raises serious questions about Omar's finances." MSNBC spent 40 minutes trying to frame it as an attack on a woman of color before a former prosecutor quietly noted that the financial discrepancies were, in fact, legitimate subjects of inquiry. Omar's team released a statement at 6:15 p.m. Boilerplate, racist attacks, and Islamophobic targeting. It was notable for what it did not contain: answers. Within 48 hours, the landscape reshaped. The House Ethics Committee announced a formal review. The DOJ confirmed that matters related to her disclosures were under active review. Most devastatingly, 2 progressive organizations issued statements expressing concern and calling for transparency. In Washington, concern is the word allies use right before they become former allies. The Minnesota Star-Tribune published a front-page investigation into Rose Lake Capital's valuation. "In 30 years, a forensic accountant said, I have never seen a valuation increase of this magnitude without a clear documentable event." Kennedy gave no victory lap. He gave one interview to a local Baton Rouge station on the porch of his home in Madisonville. "I don't enjoy that sort of thing," he said. "It's frustration. You see public servants betraying the public trust, and nobody asks the obvious questions. The frustration has to go somewhere." Asked about the racism accusation, he looked out at the lake. "I've been called a lot of things. Racist isn't one that sticks because my record speaks for itself. I asked questions about money, taxes, and campaign finance. If asking those questions makes me a racist, then the word doesn't mean anything anymore. Calling your questioner a bigot is not a defense. It's an admission that you don't have one." Kennedy took a sip of sweet tea. What happens next is up to the Department of Justice, the Ethics Committee, and the people of Minnesota. My job was to ask the questions. I asked them. He spent the rest of the evening watching the sun go down over Lake Pontchartrain. He had arrived in Washington with MOT thin folder. He had asked simple questions in a simple drawl, and the answers, or the absence of them, had done more damage than 1,000 pages of evidence ever could. The truth, as Kennedy had always known, doesn't need a thick file. It just needs someone willing to ask for it out loud.